That Sunday, the whole family gathered for dinner. My mother's hand gripped the soup ladle until her knuckles went white, and her smile was cruel and arrogant. In front of all our relatives, she pronounced sentence on my life with words as sharp as knives. She said that no matter how hard I struggled, I would never own even half the mansion my sister Claire had. My father sat beside her, nodding weakly and echoing every word, letting her humiliate me without a single defense or a shred of sympathy, as if this blatant favoritism and abuse were perfectly natural. Claire sat across from me, her lips curved in a sweet, fake smile. She looked innocent and caring, but she was relishing my public humiliation, savoring every moment of my dignity being crushed. I was 34 years old then, and I'd been swallowing injustice at that table for over a decade. That night, I did the same. I choked down all my anger, said nothing, and took it. A week later, I set aside my pride and invited her to my small apartment for tea, hoping for a scrap of sisterly warmth. But the moment she stepped through my door, her face went pale, she panicked, and she grabbed her phone to sob to our mother, twisting the truth and inventing lies about me. What happened in the hallway that night holds the filthiest, most shameful secret of my fake family, and it's the final trigger that made me tear off the mask and start my revenge. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge. The silent, overlooked daughters who always suffer in the shadows don't stay powerless forever. We remember every betrayal, every insult, every cruel word, and we wait for the right moment to shred the perfect image our families have built and bring down their arrogance and prejudice. I'm Lena, and I've spent 11 years in high-end construction and renovation. I know every trick, every hidden flaw, every shady practice in the trade. This expertise, which my family can't even understand, is the weapon I'll use to turn the tables and strike back hard. If you love twists and watching justice served to biased families, hit like, comment, and subscribe. Watch my final counterattack unfold. All the twisted malice, the sick favoritism, the suffocating competition in my family were laid bare at that supposedly warm but poison-laced Sunday dinner. My mother, Patricia, treated her phone like a trophy, endlessly showing off Claire's mansion on Rosewood Lane, those professionally shot photos. The two-story stone house had a grand arched entrance and a custom kitchen island bigger than the bed of my work truck. She shoved the phone in my face, mocking me with absolute certainty that I'd never touch that level of luxury. Solid imported walnut hardwood floors, Lena, she sneered, each word a stab. Do you have any idea what that costs? You could work your whole life and not afford a single square foot of that flooring. I knew every material, every process, every cost, and every hidden flaw in that house better than anyone. I'm in the business, I can spot what others miss in an instant. But to keep the peace, I swallowed my knowledge and mumbled a polite compliment. My father, Robert, just nodded blankly, purposely ignoring the embarrassment and pain in my eyes. He tossed off a casual, "Claire's the one who made it, our only successful child." In one sentence, he erased 11 years of my early mornings, late nights, and sweat, reducing all my hard work to nothing. Claire, across the table, slowly cut her food with a knife and fork, her gentle exterior hiding pure smugness. She basked in the family's relentless attacks on me, enjoying every second of it. Then my mother slammed her spoon down with a sharp clatter, folded her hands, and delivered the speech she'd rehearsed for maximum destruction. Wake up, kid. You'll never live in a house as nice as your sister's. Not a single relative spoke up for me, not one showed pity, not one broke that cruel silence. The worst part wasn't even the words, it was the dead quiet afterward, the silent agreement of everyone at the table. They collectively labeled me a failure, worthless, nowhere near your sister, and ground my dignity into the dirt. Claire looked up at me with eyes full of fake sympathy but real arrogance, and asked softly, "You're jealous, aren't you?" That was the cruelest betrayal, soft words wrapped around a blade, sounding like comfort but actually rubbing salt into my wounds. I gripped my teacup so hard my knuckles turned white. These hands, covered in scars and calluses, were my badges of honor from 11 years of hard work, the hands that had built countless houses and earned my place in this industry. I've always been proud of these hands and my honest labor, but to my family, my sweat was a joke compared to Claire's glamorous life. And in that moment, while staring at that perfect photo, I spotted a fatal flaw that nobody else could see, a structural disease in that supposedly dream house, a ticking time bomb that, when it exploded, would destroy Claire's image, my parents' vanity, and our whole family's facade. To understand my careful, deadly retaliation, you need to know the real me. I run a high-end renovation studio called Steadfast Builders, and I've been in this field for over a decade. I don't just build and fix houses, I know their structural logic, process details, and every industry trick. My old master taught me to be obsessive, even a 1/16-inch error in a wall surface meant tearing it all down. He also taught me the harshest truth: no matter how beautiful a building looks, if it has even one hidden flaw, time will make it collapse completely. I've never forgotten that. 3 years ago, I took on a condemned house on Cedar Street that everyone told me to abandon. The frame was rotting, the roof caved in, the structure was a mess. My relatives laughed at me and said to just tear it down and give up. But I refused to accept that. I stripped away all the finishes, bared the original skeleton, and rebuilt everything from scratch with my own sweat and savings, every load calculation, safety layout, structural improvement, every permit, inspection, and approval, I handled myself. No family support, no outside help, just me. 2 years and every penny I had later, I turned that despised wreck into a flawless, over-engineered house that was far better than my sister's showy mansion. I never bragged about my work or tried to explain myself to my biased family. But my quiet humility was interpreted as poverty and failure, my unassuming nature was seen as proof I didn't measure up. In their minds, my sister, who married well and looked glamorous, was the family's pride, while I, the working-class builder, was an embarrassment, a loser. For years, I silently endured their cold looks, their pity, their whispered judgments, letting them live in their bubble of false superiority. I never called them out, just waited to shatter their fake glory with my own hands. But that one photo, that mansion they all worshipped, kept me awake at night. I knew better than anyone that those perfect exteriors hid dangerous construction flaws and safety risks, a bomb waiting to go off. At that dinner, watching my mother gloat and use my sister to put me down, I forced myself to keep quiet and bide my time. My family's favoritism had rotted to the core. Claire is 3 years older than me, 37 now. From birth, she was the golden child, the one who got all the praise, all the affection, all the glory. In church, she was our mother's showpiece, in the neighborhood, she was the model of success, and I was always the one compared unfavorably, always the shadow. 6 years ago, she married a slick, vain property investor named Marcus Webb. Marcus wore designer everything, talked about investment opportunities and high net worth circles, and acted like a big shot. Before developing the Rosewood Lane enclave, he'd put up several flashy mansions that were all hype and no substance. Cutting corners was his specialty. From the first time I met Marcus, I saw through him. His sophistication was an act, his success was inflated, and behind all that shine was shoddy work and shady deals. I kept my mouth shut and watched. Claire never insulted me outright, but her gentle condescension, her fake concern, were worse than open abuse. She'd pat my arm and say she felt sorry for my struggling business, that renting was nothing to be ashamed of, but every kind word was loaded with smug superiority, a reminder of my mediocrity and her triumph. That night, she assumed I was just jealous. But in her world of constant favoritism, she couldn't understand that my tension wasn't envy, it was fear for her fake perfect life. The secret I'd kept for 2 years was about to change everything. All of Marcus's high-end projects were built by a problematic contractor named Kevin Shaw. 2 years ago, Kevin asked me to bid on a framing job, but within hours on site, I saw his illegal shortcuts, safety violations, and blatant cheating. Every step laid another trap. I walked out and never worked with him again. I knew every house he touched was a disaster waiting to happen. And the cruelest irony was that my family, my perfect sister, was happily living in one of those ticking time bombs. My parents' blind favoritism fueled this whole farce. My mother had always lived for small-town status, for appearances and petty one-upmanship. She measured her worth by her children's achievements. Once Claire married Marcus and moved into that mansion, my mother finally had the ultimate bragging rights. She'd won the neighborly competition for good. She talked about Claire's success everywhere: church, the hair salon, the supermarket checkout line, treating Claire's accomplishments as her own victories. Eventually, it wasn't about Claire's happiness at all, it was just fuel for her own ego. My hard-built business, my sturdy little house, my steady life, they meant nothing to her because I couldn't give her the flashy image she craved. My father's cowardly silence and tacit endorsement were just as cutting. Last winter, he had a sudden heart attack and spent 2 nights in the hospital, and the mountain of bills terrified him. He wouldn't even open them. Whenever dinner talk turned to Claire and Marcus's wealth and properties, he'd bow his head, cover his face, hiding his guilt and anxiety. I saw every struggle, every weakness, every fear, and I stored them away, waiting for the truth to come out. But when my mother saw me staring at him, she flew at me, accusing me of stirring up trouble. The one who'd said nothing the whole time, me, was the troublemaker, the one who didn't belong. After that dinner, I didn't contact anyone in my family for 3 days. My phone had 3 voice messages from my mother, all berating me for being ungrateful, for having a bad attitude, for not appreciating Claire's kindness. I didn't listen to them. I swiped them away and walked into my workshop. Steadfast Builder's office is in a converted warehouse on the outskirts of town, tin roof, exposed brick, but all the best equipment, laser distance meters, structural analysis software, 3D modeling workstations, and a whole wall of project files. I went to the back, punched in the code on a metal cabinet, and pulled out a thick manila envelope. Inside were photos and notes I'd taken at Kevin Shaw's site 2 years ago: rebar spacing far too wide, concrete mix below spec, insufficient stirrups in load-bearing columns, missing waterproofing layers. Every photo had my handwritten annotations with dates, building numbers, and exact locations. I'd meant to bury those files forever. Construction is a small world, and plenty of people will step on you to get ahead. Better to stay out of trouble. But at that dinner, when my mother shoved her phone in my face and I saw the faint smile in Claire's eyes, my father's bowed head, and my own white-knuckled grip on my teacup, I suddenly realized that silence wouldn't buy me respect, and backing down wouldn't buy me love. My silence only gave them a doormat. That night I called an old contact, Lao Song, a quality inspector who'd worked at the city's Housing Safety Center for 23 years. Now retired, he consulted on the side, blunt, honest, and feared by everyone in the trade. I gave him the short version, without naming names, and said I had photographic evidence of serious violations on a high-end project. He paused, then said quietly, "Lena, you're not one to make trouble. This time you're really angry, huh?" I said, "Master Song, I've held back for over 10 years. I'm done." He said, "Bring the stuff over." After hanging up, I pulled out an external hard drive from the bottom of the cabinet. It held older files, as-built drawings from Marcus Webb's early projects, compared to actual site conditions. Before I started my own studio, I'd done subcontracting for a supervision firm and had come across internal audit documents that showed discrepancies between Marcus's structural calculations and field measurements. I'd copied them without thinking too much about it then. Now I was grateful I had. The next morning, I met Lao Song at his usual tea house. He wore a faded work jacket. His grey hair neatly combed, a pot of oolong in front of him. I slid the envelope and hard drive across the table. He put on his reading glasses and went through every photo and note, his frown deepening. After 15 minutes, he took off his glasses and said, "If this is all true, It's enough to revoke his construction license, force a full redo, and possibly bring criminal charges. I poured him tea and asked, "Do you think I should go to the authorities?" He sipped and replied, "Are you sure you want to take on this guy? I hear your sister's married to him." I smiled. That's exactly why I can't look the other way. He thought for a moment, then put the files in his briefcase. "I'll do a preliminary assessment and give you a written opinion. Wait for my notice. But I'll be honest, once formal proceedings start, you'll lose control of how it plays out. Your family, be prepared." I said, "I've been ready." Outside the tea house, I stood in the fall wind, smelling dust and exhaust. I took a deep breath and called my assistant, Ju. "Pull this year's maintenance records for the Cedar Street house, I'll need them this afternoon." She asked, "Didn't we already sign off on that place? Is something wrong?" I said, "No, just reminding myself, any rotten frame can be rebuilt into something solid if you put in the work." That afternoon, I went home to Cedar Street. That house is my creation and my sanctuary. After it was finished, I turned the first floor into a small sitting room with structural drawings and awards on the wall, every single one earned by me, with no family to celebrate with. I changed into work boots and climbed to the second-floor balcony to check the exterior waterproofing. The sun hit the new grey paint and reflected a warm glow. I remembered the sparks that burned my arms when I welded the steel frame, scars that had faded but not vanished. During those 2 years, I barely slept. I worked on site all day, ran load calculations at night, and kept a worn copy of the structural design code always at hand. But I never felt miserable, because every brick was my own choice, unlike in that house, where even my breathing was considered wrong. My phone buzzed. It was my father, Robert. He rarely called me. Last time was 6 months earlier, when I helped him with medical insurance paperwork. I answered. His voice was weaker than before, tentative and apologetic. "Lena, don't take your mother's words to heart, she's just..." I cut him off. "Dad, how are you feeling?" He paused, then said, "All right, just occasional palpitations. I'm taking my meds." I said, and waited. He hesitated, then finally said, "Your sister's having a small dinner party next week with some business friends. She wants you to come, to get together." I laughed inwardly. Claire's party, business friends, and she's inviting me. To serve as a contrast, to make her look even more brilliant in front of her guests. But I answered calmly, "Sure, I'll be there." After hanging up, I stood on the balcony and gazed at the city skyline. Claire's Rosewood Lane was in that direction, miles away, but I could almost see the corrosion eating its shiny exterior, the concrete cracking beneath. I gripped my phone and told myself, this time, I'm not going to endure, I'm going to set the trap. The dinner was 5 days away, and I didn't waste them. Lao Song worked fast. On the 3rd day he gave me a preliminary report, professionally worded but damning. In the buildings Kevin Shaw had worked on, at least 2/3 of the structural joints failed to meet national safety standards, posing serious risks. The report suggested the Housing Authority conduct a special inspection, and if necessary, destructive testing by a third party. Lao Song called and said, "I've issued this report in my personal capacity. I can help you submit it officially, but you need to know, once you do, you may burn bridges with your sister and your mother for good." I stared at the report for a long time, then locked it in my office safe. I couldn't act yet. I needed to observe Claire and Marcus at the dinner, see who my mother had been talking to, and gauge whether anyone had already caught wind of Marcus's problems. Also, I had to prepare my own fallback. If everything blew up, I'd need enough cash to keep my studio running and a public platform to speak from. I contacted the editor of a small architecture magazine who'd interviewed me before and pitched an article on old building renovation, no names, purely technical, but with a clear critique of pretty facades that hide rotten cores. It would run after the dinner, setting the stage for my later complaint. Friday evening, I visited my father in the hospital. He'd been admitted again for an irregular heartbeat, and the doctors wanted a full angiogram. My mother was there every day, but she spent more time in the hallway comparing children with other families. My oldest lives in a mansion, and my son-in-law is a big developer. When I walked into the room, she was glued to her phone. She looked up and her smile vanished. "Oh, look who finally shows up." I didn't respond. I put the fruit on the nightstand and looked at my father, pale, sunken-eyed, and four in his arm, the monitor beeping softly. "Dad, how are you feeling?" I pulled up a chair. He forced a smile. "Same old thing, nothing serious." My mother snorted. "His illness is from worrying about everyone. Your sister is busy running around, and she still finds time to care for him. You, on the other hand, act like you don't care." I turned to her. "Mom, I spoke to his doctor yesterday. He said Dad needs rest and less stress, especially less of the kind of talk that raises blood pressure." She started to flare up, but my father coughed twice and cut her off. "Enough, enough. She's here, let's not argue." She left to get hot water, and we were alone. He was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "Lena, is there something you want to tell me?" I looked into his tired eyes, feeling a mix of emotions. This man had never stood up for me in front of my mother or sister, but now I saw a vulnerability I'd never seen before. I held back the news of my complaint and instead asked, "Dad, have you heard about any problems with Marcus's houses?" His eyes flickered, then he lowered them. "Problems? Your brother-in-law's a big businessman, everything's by the book." I pressed, "By the book? Then do you know Kevin Shaw?" His face went stiff for a second, but he recovered quickly. "No. I don't know any Kevin." "Why are you asking?" I didn't push. "Just asking. I heard some things about his sites." He didn't answer, but his hand gripped the sheet. I knew then he knew something but was too afraid to say it. I made a mental note and didn't press further. When my mother returned with the hot water, the room went back to its false quiet. I stayed a little longer, then got up to leave. At the door, my father called out, "Lena." I turned. He opened his mouth, but all he said was, "Drive carefully." I nodded, walked out into the corridor, and stood there a long time. The wall clock ticked, nurses wheeled their carts by. I clutched my bag strap and told myself, soon, nothing will stay hidden. The dinner was held at a private club near Rosewood Lane, Marcus's usual haunt. I wore a dark grey blazer, no makeup, hair pulled back, looking out of place among the polished wives. My mother frowned and whispered, "Is that how you dress? Your sister invited Design World friends, couldn't you make some effort?" I smiled. "Mom, I wore this to a client meeting last month, and they loved it, said I looked like someone who gets things done." She rolled her eyes. Claire wore a champagne-colored velvet dress, a thin diamond necklace, her hair immaculate, straight out of a magazine. She held a wineglass, chatting with guests, and when she spotted me she glided over and hooked her arm in mine. "Lena, I was just saying how long it's been." She was always elegant and warm in public, never missing a beat. I smiled back. "Sis, so many guests, are they all your friends?" She tilted her head and purred, "Mostly Marcus's business partners, and a few architects." "I thought you'd like to network." "How thoughtful, invite colleagues just so they could see the contrast, glamorous mansion sister versus lowly contractor sister." At dinner, I sat near the end of the long table, next to a bespectacled man who handed me a card, senior partner at a design firm. He politely asked what I did. I said I ran a small studio focusing on renovations. He gave a non-committal, "Oh," and turned to talk about luxury villa design trends. I quietly ate my appetizer while they tossed around words like Italian marble, custom Italian cabinetry, whole house smart systems. Marcus stood at the head of the table to toast his new project, Jade Bay, which was about to launch. He spoke as if it were the city's crown jewel. I discreetly searched for the general contractor on my phone. It was Kevin Shaw's company again. I took a screenshot and filed it. Midway, I excused myself to the restroom, really just to escape the suffocating atmosphere. In the hallway, I overheard two female guests gossiping. "Did you hear? One of Marcus's Oakwood houses has a basement leak. Owner's been fighting with them for a month." Another whispered, "More than that, I know a renovation contractor who's been hired by several Oakwood owners to fix waterproofing and electrical work. The original construction was terrible." I filed that away too. Back at the table, Claire approached with a glass of wine and murmured, "Lena, that Mr. Peter, the partner, told me he's looking for a team with old building renovation experience. Why don't you chat him up?" She played the helpful sister, but I knew she wanted to see me flounder. I surprised her by standing up, walking over to Peter, and introducing myself. I talked about my Cedar Street project, structural reinforcement, integrating old and new materials, seismic upgrades without altering the historic character. He started listening politely, then grew genuinely interested, asking technical questions. I answered clearly and concisely. Finally, he pulled out his phone and added me on WeChat. "Ms. Lena, I have a historic mansion renovation project. I've been dissatisfied with the previous bidders. Would you be willing to take a look?" Claire stood off to the side, still smiling, but I saw her fingers tighten around her wineglass. My mother leaned in and asked, "Why are they exchanging numbers?" Claire said lightly, "Just talking business," but I knew she was annoyed. She'd wanted me to look foolish, and instead I'd landed a lead. At the end, Marcus saw guests out, beaming. As I passed him, I paused and said in a low voice, "Marcus, is Kevin Shaw still working for you?" His smile flickered but returned. "Of course. Kevin's our long-term partner." I smiled. Good for him. I heard his sites had some trouble, lots of paperwork to redo. I didn't wait for his reply and walked to the parking lot. The air behind me seemed to freeze for a second. I heard him call my name, but I didn't look back. Driving home, the night was deep, streetlights sliding past. I put on an old English song, but I didn't hear a word. I knew from tonight on, Marcus and Claire would be on alert. They might destroy evidence, bribe Kevin Shaw, or threaten me. But I'd gone too far to retreat. Back at Cedar Street, I made tea, sat at my desk, and organized the night's clues: Kevin Shaw's Jade Bay project, the leak complaints, Peter's contact. I needed a complete timeline that would be airtight. At 1 a.m., I shut down the computer and stood at the window, watching the city lights. Beneath those lights, how many buildings were being slowly ruined by cutting corners? And my family was living in one of the prettiest of those death traps. 2 weeks later, I got a call from an unknown number. A woman named Mrs. Wang, a Rosewood Lane resident, said, "Are you Lena? A friend told me you understand building structures. I need you to look at my basement. Walls are cracking and the property management won't help." My heart jumped. "Which unit?" 19, 2 doors down from the Bennett house. I went that afternoon. Mrs. Wang, in sweats and messy hair, led me down to the basement. I turned on my flashlight and saw cracks crisscrossing the concrete walls, some diagonal, wide enough to fit a coin. I knelt to study the crack patterns, used a laser distance meter to check wall verticality. There was slight displacement. I sketched notes quickly. My diagnosis: uneven foundation settlement, probably due to poorly compacted backfill and failing waterproofing causing soil erosion. These issues don't show up during inspection but emerge a year or two after occupancy. "Is it serious? Can it be fixed?" she asked anxiously. I stood and brushed off my hands. "It can be fixed, but it'll require excavating the foundation for grouting, major work, costly. I'd recommend you get an independent inspection report, then take it to the developer. they're obligated to cover structural defects. Her eyes reddened. I complained to the management, but they said it was normal shrinkage and I didn't understand. I gave her my card. Follow my advice. If the developer drags its feet, I can refer you to a good testing company. She thanked me profusely. As I left number 19, I glanced at Claire's house, number 13. It looked pristine, the grand arch, the manicured lawn. But I knew it shared the same soil, same backfill, same waterproofing. If number 19 had problems, number 13 couldn't escape. Maybe the cracks were still hidden, but time would expose them. That night, I got a text from an unknown number. Lena, stay out of things you don't understand. It won't end well. I didn't reply, just blocked it. No need to guess who was behind it. Marcus wouldn't send it himself, but he had plenty of people who would. I screenshot and filed it, a threat, useful later. True to his word, Peter called and took me to look at the historic mansion. It was on Yongfu Road in the north part of the city, a 3-story brick and timber building from the 1930s, originally owned by an overseas Chinese, later sold to a cultural company that wanted to turn it into a high-end gallery. The client had a generous budget but demanded maximum preservation of the original character while meeting modern exhibition loads and safety codes. I spent a full day surveying with my team and drafted a preliminary plan. The client was very satisfied and signed an upfront agreement on the spot. The design fee alone would keep my studio afloat for half a year. That evening, I treated the team to hot pot. Ju, flushed with beer, said, "Boss, this is our lucky year, right?" I clinked her glass. "Let's just do the work well." I knew this success would give me more leverage, but also make Marcus more desperate. He might sabotage my new project or spread rumors about me. I stayed meticulous, documented every step, confirmed everything with formal emails, and photographed all work in progress. Meanwhile, Lao Song reported that his preliminary report had been submitted to the city's housing authority. They said they'd look into it, but formal inspections were backlogged. He suggested I gather more homeowner complaints and field evidence. I contacted other Rosewood Lane owners with similar issues and set up a small chat group where they could share repair and experiences. One of them, Mr. Lin, was fiery, had already fought with management, even drilled holes in his own walls to see inside, finding uneven insulation and exposed rusting rebar. He posted videos in the group, raging, "I'll sue them. They cheated us out of our life savings." I advised him privately to hold off until the official inspection, then submit everything together for maximum impact. These efforts, though quiet, reached Claire's ears. One night my mother called, sharper than usual, "Lena, are you scheming behind our backs? Your sister says someone's investigating the Oakwood houses, is it you? If you mess with your brother-in-law's business, I'll disown you." I kept my voice calm. "Mom, I care about safety. If I know a problem and don't speak up, and someone gets hurt, could you live with that? You and Dad stay over at her place sometimes. What if it collapsed?" She faltered, then snapped, "Are you cursing them? That house is perfect. You're just jealous." I didn't argue. "Mom, it's late. Get some rest." I hung up. Standing on the balcony, the cold wind bit through my jacket. My heart ached, not because of her words, I'd long stopped expecting her support, but because doing the right thing made me the enemy of the people I loved. Still, I'd chosen this road, just as I'd chosen to rebuild that condemned house alone. The weeks that followed were tense. Kevin Shaw sent a messenger to invite me to dinner, just catching up, which I declined. The next day, someone slipped a printed note under the studio door, "Lena, don't open doors that should stay shut." Ju was rattled and asked who I'd offended. I tore up the note and said, "Just business competition." But I quietly upgraded all office security cameras and reminded the staff to be extra careful. Meanwhile, a serious accident happened at Marcus's Jade Bay project. A crane cable snapped while lifting a precast panel, and a 2-ton piece crashed down, injuring 2 workers. The news was suppressed, but it spread fast in construction circles. My first thought was that this wasn't a freak accident, it was the inevitable result of long-term safety negligence. I quietly found out who the injured men's families were and anonymously sent them a guide on workers' rights, how to gather evidence, apply for compensation, and seek legal help. I couldn't reveal my name, but I had to do something. This also made me add safety violations to Kevin Shaw's ever-growing list. A week later, the cultural company's boss, Mr. Wu, who'd hired us for the historic mansion, invited me to his company's opening reception to discuss construction details. It was at a 5-star hotel downtown, all glitter and glamour. I wore my usual simple blazer, but I felt more at ease than at Claire's party. Mr. Wu introduced me to investors as a structural expert, not a contractor. That stung a little. A stranger had more respect for my profession than my own family. Halfway through, I spotted Claire and Marcus. They were in the same circles and had also been invited. We met in the middle of the lobby. Claire's eyes widened when she saw me, then she quickly put on her warm smile. "Lena, you're here too." Marcus stood beside her. Mr. Wu, delighted, said, "You two are sisters." "What a coincidence." "Lena is our project's lead designer. I really admire her expertise." Claire's smile froze for a fraction of a second, but she recovered gracefully. "My sister's always been so capable." Then she turned to Mr. Wu and launched into a conversation about art investment, smoothly steering attention away from me. Marcus just watched with a complicated look. I stepped back to a corner with my drink, watching them work the room. I felt oddly calm, no more hurt or resentment, just a cold observer's detachment. I knew the harder they tried to maintain that glossy image, the harder they'd fall when the truth came out. After the reception, as I was leaving, Marcus caught up with me in the side entrance's shadow. He was smoking a thin cigar, the smoke curling in the night air. "Lena, let's talk." I stopped and turned. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I know you've been looking into Rosewood Lane. Name your price, or whatever you want." I laughed. "You think it's about money?" He squinted. "Isn't it always? If not money, what? You want me to divorce your sister? Or you want the whole family to bow down?" I shook my head. "I just want the problems to be seen. People live in those houses. If you think you can buy my silence, you don't know me." He took a long drag. "You'll regret this." I said, "I've already regretted staying silent for too long." I walked away into the parking lot, his glare burning on my back. From that moment, there was no turning back. Another week went by, and the hospital called to say my father wanted to see me alone. I went that afternoon. My mother was at church, so it was just him. He looked worse than before. He gestured for me to close the door, then reached under his pillow and pulled out an old envelope. "That Kevin Shaw thing?" "I know a little." Inside were photocopies of a contract between Marcus and Kevin from years ago, with a handwritten note, "All acceptance documents to be prepared by the contractor. The developer assumes no quality inspection responsibility." My father whispered. Marcus dropped it once when he was drunk, and I picked it up without giving it back. I knew something was off, but I didn't dare say anything. "Your mother, you know." I gripped the pages. "Dad, this is proof they colluded to fake inspection reports. Why didn't you show it sooner?" He closed his eyes, voice trembling. "I was scared your sister would divorce, scared your mother would lose it, scared the family would break. I've been a coward all my life, Lena." I didn't blame him. He was just another victim of fear, just like the homeowners Marcus had cheated. I carefully tucked the envelope into my bag and held his hand. "Dad, you did the right thing. Now it's not too late. He opened his eyes, tears glistening. Are you going to break with your sister? I paused. She and Marcus have been breaking me down for years. I'm finally fighting back. It was drizzling as I left the hospital. With my father's evidence added to Lao Song's report and the homeowner complaints, I had a solid case. I just needed the right moment to drop the bomb. That night I composed a long email to the city's housing authority, attaching all digital evidence and clearly outlining the systematic problems in Marcus Webb's developments, requesting a formal investigation. My finger hovered over send for what felt like minutes. I could hear my own heartbeat. When I finally hit send, I let out a long breath, walked to the kitchen, and drank a glass of water. My throat felt tight. The next morning, Lao Song called, excited, "Lena, your complaint was accepted. The Housing Authority and Quality Inspection Station will do a surprise inspection of Rosewood Lane and Jade Bay next week. You may be asked to assist as an expert." I said, "I'm available." After hanging up, I stood by the window as sunlight broke through the clouds. I imagined Claire and Marcus getting the notice, imagining my mother's reaction, a mix of satisfaction and sadness. But the sadness was soon overridden by determination. This had to go through. I didn't expect the news to spread so fast. Maybe the authority tipped off the management, or Marcus had insiders. 3 days later, my mother barged into my studio, her face livid. "Lena, what did you do?" "Marcus just got a notice that someone reported their quality issues. They're coming to inspect." "Was it you? Are you trying to destroy your sister's life?" Ju and the staff froze. I asked them to step out, closed the door, and faced my mother calmly. "Mom, yes, it was me." She staggered back, her lips trembling. "You're insane. How could you? That's your sister's home." I said, "It's also hundreds of other people's homes. I've seen the cracks at Rosewood Lane. I know why the crane accident happened. If I stayed quiet and someone died, could you live with yourself while boasting about her mansion?" Her face reddened. "Don't lecture me. You hate us. You hate that I favored your sister." I looked at her, suddenly exhausted. "Yes, I hate it. But hatred doesn't make a building safe. This isn't about hate, it's about right and wrong." She went silent, tears spilling from her eyes, the first time I'd ever seen her cry in front of me. I thought she'd soften, but she wiped her face and said coldly, "Fine. You've grown wings. From today, don't call me Mom. You have no place in this family." She turned and walked out, not looking back. I stood there, watching her disappear. Ju poked her head in. "Boss, you okay?" I smiled. "Fine. Let's get back to work." That night Claire called. Her voice was still soft, but each word was icy. "Lena, I never thought you'd be this ruthless. Are you really pushing me into ruin?" I answered, "Claire, that house you're living in has a sinking foundation. You think I'm hurting you, I'm actually saving you." She laughed bitterly. "Saving me? You've been jealous of me your whole life, and now you've found a way to get even. Don't pretend to be noble." I gripped the phone. "Believe what you want, but the inspection will show the truth." After we hung up, I sat in the living room with only a desk lamp on. It was so quiet I could hear the second hand ticking. I thought back to a winter when I was 7 or 8. My mother bought Claire a new down jacket, and I wore Claire's worn-out old coat with frayed sleeves. That night I cried, and my father came to me and said, "Lena, don't blame your mother, she has no choice." Back then I understood, no choice was just an excuse for favoritism. Now I was grown, and I didn't need their scraps of choice. I opened my phone photos and found the completion picture of the Cedar Street house, sunshine, clean walls, a little potted plant on the doorstep. I captioned it, "The home I built myself is stronger than any shelter they gave me." and set it as my wallpaper. The inspection day came. I accompanied the quality station team as a technical consultant. The atmosphere was tense, the property manager ran around pale-faced, and Marcus showed up in a crisp suit, but his anxiety showed. When he saw me, his glare cut like a knife, but I held my ground. The team split into groups and focused on units 13, 19, and 22. In the basements and garage mezzanines, they chiseled open sections of wall, exposing rebar and concrete. The lead engineer measured bar spacing and concrete thickness, recording everything. Marcus kept insisting, "We built everything to code, it's all above board." The engineer ignored him and pointed at one exposed rebar. "This main bar is 2 sizes smaller than the design calls for, and the stirrup spacing is way too wide. See for yourself." Marcus turned white. Mrs. Wang from number 19 came with a stack of photos and management correspondence, red-eyed, and filed her complaint with the inspectors, who noted everything. I watched from a distance, not much satisfaction, just a heavy relief that someone was finally listening. The inspection took all day. Before leaving, the lead engineer told me privately, "Preliminary findings suggest it's worse than we thought. The acceptance reports were probably falsified. We'll refer this for further investigation." I said, "Let me know if you need any more information." As I walked out of the neighborhood, dusk had fallen. Claire's car was parked on the curb, and she stood beside it in a black trench coat, watching me from a distance. I walked over. She didn't speak, just handed me an envelope. Inside was a single page. "Lena, I'm pregnant with my second child. Do you really want your nephew to be born into a scandal?" I looked up. She had no trace of her usual gentle mask, just raw exhaustion and desperation. My heart clenched. She was pregnant. For a moment I almost wavered. If this blew up, Marcus might face prison, the houses would be condemned or demolished, Claire would lose her lifestyle, and her child would be born under a cloud. But then I thought of Mrs. Wang's basement cracks, the injured workers, and my father's words, "I've been a coward my whole life." I took a breath and handed the envelope back. "Claire, the baby is innocent, but the house isn't. If Marcus steps up, accepts responsibility, and fixes everything, it won't be the worst case. You'd do better to persuade him to do the right thing than to beg me to back down." She didn't take the envelope. She turned, got in her car, and started the engine. The window rolled down halfway and she said, "You've changed." Then she drove into the night. I stood there, clutching the envelope, feeling my fingers tremble. Yes, I had changed. I was no longer the Lena who clutched a teacup in silence. I was someone holding a blade, not to kill, but to cut away the rot so something new could grow. Over the next month, the inspection results sent shockwaves through the city's construction industry. The Housing Authority officially cited multiple projects for serious quality issues and falsified acceptance documents, ordered full rectification, and suspended sales permits for all of Marcus's developments. Kevin Shaw was summoned for questioning, and the media started covering the story, initially without naming specific developers, but everyone in the trade knew. Claire stopped posting on social media. My mother didn't call me. My father, Robert, sent occasional voice messages asking if I was okay. I said I was fine. He didn't mention the family, but I knew he was caught in the middle. Marcus's lawyer sent a cease and desist letter accusing me of malicious reporting and slander. I forwarded it to Lao Song, who laughed and said, "Let them sue, we'll air all the evidence in open court. Then we'll see who looks worse." I ignored it and kept working. Our historic mansion project on Yongfu Road began in earnest. I was on site daily, covered in dust, dealing with cement and timber. Mr. Wu's trust in me grew, and he even offered to invest in expanding my studio. I declined the expansion but accepted extra budget for better equipment. I didn't want to be too flashy under the current spotlight. I just wanted every building I touched to be solid, safe, and honest. One afternoon, Mr. Lin, the activist homeowner, messaged me to say he and several other owners had hired a lawyer to sue the developer for compensation and full repairs. He wrote, "Lena, thank you for showing the way. We were all scared before, but now we're united and we have backbone." I replied, "Good luck, you're in the right." That night I slept well. I also started working on a series of public articles to educate buyers on how to spot hidden defects. The first piece was about early signs of uneven foundation settlement, time to capitalize on the current buzz. The magazine editor said if it did well, we could make it a regular column. I agreed. One day, I visited my Cedar Street house and trimmed the garden. A little girl in a school uniform stopped and watched me. "Auntie, are you planting flowers?" I looked up. "No, I'm pulling weeds. They take nutrients away from the flowers." She nodded vaguely and ran off. Watching her bounce away, I realized I was doing the same thing, pulling out the weeds of resentment and self-pity so I could grow. Winter came, and the leaves fell from the Cedar Street trees. I took a day off, turned off my phone, and sat in the living room reading. Through the window, I saw passers-by in thick scarves, their breath fogging in the cold. I remembered childhood winters when my mother would knit a new scarf for Claire, and I'd get Claire's old faded one. I used to feel cold not just in my neck but all over. Now I had my own warm house, my own soft cashmere scarves. That old chill hadn't vanished, it had become fuel to keep moving forward. The city's investigation continued, reportedly moving to higher authorities. Marcus's stock crashed, partners pulled out. Claire listed the Rosewood Lane house for sale, but no one bit. My mother stopped boasting at church. I heard she just sat in the back and left quickly after Mass. These news items drifted to me. I didn't seek them out, but they found me. One day, I received a handwritten letter from Claire, her handwriting still elegant. She said she'd had a prenatal checkup and the baby was fine. She planned to temporarily move to our mother's old house in the suburbs to lie low. At the end, she wrote, "Lena, I never thought I'd end up relying on the kind of simple, plain life you once seemed to look down on. Maybe you were right. Everyone's house has to withstand the weather. Mine didn't. Yours, I hear, is solid. I wish you and your home well." I read it, didn't reply, folded it, and put it in my desk drawer next to the evidence files, one for the past, one for the future. I closed the drawer, made myself a bowl of hot noodles, and as the steam rose, I remembered the clang of my mother's soup ladle on that awful Sunday. That sound had faded, replaced by a quieter, stronger resolve. I knew this wasn't over. Marcus's trial, Kevin Shaw's criminal liability, my mother's changing mindset, my father's health, Claire's and the kids' future, all long roads. But I was no longer impatient for a finale. I'd thrown the truth into the light, now I'd let time do its work. I carried my noodle bowl to the window as night fell. City lights twinkled in the distance, every light a household with joys and arguments, favoritism and reconciliation. My family had been a prison of favoritism, now it was my own fortified home. My skills and the evidence were no longer weapons, they were a toolbox, to repair what should be fixed, tear down what should go, and protect those who deserved protection. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall. I wiped the condensation from the glass and watched the snow settle silently on the stone steps, layer upon layer. I remembered a snowball fight with Claire when we were very young. She pushed me down, I ran inside crying, and my mother held her while my father stood far away. That fall didn't really hurt, what hurt was that nobody helped me up. Now I'd learned to stand up on my own, brush off the snow, and keep walking. The snow fell harder. I closed the window, drew the curtain, and sat under the warm lamp, opening a new structural engineering book. The section drawings and load tables were dense, and I focused hard. Every building, no matter how beautiful, stands only on honest foundations and honest work. People are the same. And I was rebuilding myself, brick by brick. The road to revenge was long, but I wasn't in a rush. The court blow had already hit its mark. Next, I wanted not just to shatter their masks but to show every person who'd been overlooked and silenced that silence isn't the only answer. Expertise and courage together can topple any mountain of prejudice. Before that first snow melted, my father's condition took a sudden turn for the worse. I rushed from the Yeongfu Road site to the hospital. The corridor was already crowded. My mother sat on a bench, gripping an old scarf, knuckles white, eyes swollen. Claire stood against the wall, visibly pregnant and disheveled, having come from the suburbs in a hurry. Marcus was absent, tied up with lawyers and investors. The doctor emerged grim-faced, his semi-conscious, vital signs dropping. "Prepare yourselves." My mother shot up, stammered, and finally said, "Let's go in." We filed in. My father lay on the bed, oxygen mask on, face ashen. His eyes were half open, roving around the room. When his gaze landed on me, it lit up faintly, and his finger rose, pointing at me. My mother hesitated, then said, "Lena, stay. We'll wait outside." Claire looked at me, said nothing, and helped my mother out. The door closed, leaving only the low beep of the heart monitor. I walked to the bed and took his hand, cold, dry, skin like paper. "Dad," I whispered. He made a gurgling sound, and I leaned close. He said, "Cabinet, bottom drawer, green notebook." Then coughed violently. The monitor beeped erratically. I pressed the call button. After he stabilized, he closed his eyes, and a tear rolled down his cheek. I understood, he had something to give me, hidden somewhere. That night he slipped into a coma and never woke up. Early the next morning, he passed away in his sleep. I stood by the window, watching the sky go from dark blue to gray. My mother and Claire sobbed together, but I couldn't cry. A part of me felt hollow, filled with cold snow. After the funeral, I went back to my parents' old house. My mother had moved with Claire to the suburbs, so the house was empty, smelling of dust and old wood. Following my father's hint, I opened the bottom drawer of his wardrobe and found a faded green notebook. Inside were his handwritten notes, shaky but legible. What I read made me gasp. Years ago, when Marcus was short of cash, my father had signed as guarantor on a bank loan. He wrote, "I know it's risky, but if I don't sign, my son-in-law's company will go under, and my daughter and grandson will have nothing. I have no choice." Later pages showed he'd repeatedly asked Marcus to release him, but Marcus always said, "Wait a little longer." The last entry, dated last fall, was scrawled, "I heard Lena reported them." I feel strangely relieved. Maybe that debt won't need to be paid. But the bank is pressing. I'm too scared to tell anyone. I closed the notebook, my fingers cold. My father had hidden a debt guarantee from everyone until his death. If Marcus's company collapsed, the bank would come after my father's estate, and my mother and Claire would be dragged in. I needed to know the amount and terms. I contacted my father's lawyer and visited several banks. It took a week to piece together. The guarantee was for $450,000, roughly 3.2 million yuan at the time, with joint liability. If the borrower defaulted, the guarantor had to pay it all. The borrower was one of Marcus's companies, now nearly bankrupt. The bank had already started recovery proceedings. My mother's retirement account and the old house were at risk. I stared at the papers in my office. $450,000 wasn't small, but it wasn't impossible. My studio had decent revenues, and Cedar Street was fully paid off. I could scrape it together. But why should I fill Marcus's hole? My father signed, my mother was his spouse, Claire was his daughter, they should share the burden. Yet I couldn't stand by, especially not my mother. She'd been so proud all her life, losing the old house would break her. I called my mother. It rang for a long time before she answered, her voice hoarse. What? I said, Mom, Dad left behind some debt. I've looked into it. Don't worry, I'll figure something out. There was a long silence, then muffled sobs. For the first time, I heard her cry that helplessly. She said brokenly, Your father, he never told me. I knew nothing. I said gently, I know. Let me handle it. After hanging up, I made strong coffee and started crunching numbers, cash flow, potential new projects, bank payment plans. I also had to keep some reserve for Marcus's lawsuit. By 3 a.m., my eyes burned, but I had a plan. My first column, The Silence of the Foundation, a guide to home defect detection, was published and got an unexpectedly big response. The magazine editor called excitedly to say sales were up 15%, and letters poured in from readers sharing their own inspection horror stories. Several peers offered to provide more case studies. For the second piece, I wrote about the lies of rebar, how to judge concrete quality from the surface, with diagrams and comparison photos. A local lifestyle magazine wanted to interview me, tentative title, The Woman Who Exposed the Mansion Fantasy. I agreed, with the right to review the draft. The interview took place in my studio. The journalist was a young woman with a ponytail, curious and respectful. She asked about my work and my family. I answered selectively, not naming Claire or Marcus, but hinting that someone close had influenced my choices. After the article came out, it went viral. Some praised me for exposing corruption, others accused me of self-promotion. I read them all, but didn't dwell on the criticism. What alarmed me was news from the Yongfu Road site. Ju called early one morning, Boss, someone slashed our safety nets, doused materials with paint, and tampered with the cameras. I rushed over and saw the mess. I was furious. I'd already set up encryption on the main cameras, but the culprits were pros and avoided them. However, I had a hidden backup at a side entrance, a habit I'd kept since the Kevin Shaw days. The footage showed two masked young men climbing the fence around 2 a.m., doing the damage, then fleeing out the back into an unlicensed black van. I called the police, and they opened a case. No direct link to Marcus, but everyone knew who was behind it. I saved the footage and asked Mr. Wu to increase night patrols. He wanted to go to the media, but I advised against it, better not to spook them. I knew this was just the start. A few days later, an anonymous forum post appeared, calling me a female contractor who slept her way to the top by ratting out her brother-in-law. It didn't name me, but everyone knew who it meant. The comments section exploded, some mocking, some defending. I didn't respond, I just screenshot it. I'd seen this kind of soft soap attack before. Around the same time, I got an email from a seasoned industry figure, Ju Mingyuan, vice president of the city's construction association. He wrote, Ms. Lena, your column is impressive. But I should warn you, your actions have stepped on some toes. Some members are proposing to restrict your industry activities. We're having a closed-door meeting next Wednesday. You're welcome to attend and observe. I thanked him and accepted. At the meeting, I wore a dark blue suit and sat quietly in the corner. Several people made veiled comments about certain practitioners using media to disrupt healthy competition. Ju didn't name names but glanced at me now and then. Finally, I stood up and said, Dear seniors, my column is about technical issues, not individuals. If any project can withstand scrutiny, my articles won't harm it. The problem lies in the construction itself, not in my writing. The room was silent for a moment, then someone started clapping softly. Ju smiled and nodded. Later, he said privately, You did well. But be careful, you have more enemies than you think. Late December, on a bitter cold morning, Claire called me, the first time she'd initiated contact since the inspection. Her voice was weak. Lena, my water broke, a month early, the baby might not make it. I gripped the phone. Where are you? I'm coming. She gave me the address of a private maternity hospital, her voice breaking. Mom's on her way. Marcus isn't answering. I sped there. In the corridor outside the OR, my mother sat on the edge of a chair, hands clasped, lips moving in prayer. When she saw me, she said nothing, just gestured for me to sit. We sat side by side in silence, the smell of disinfectant and the distant squeak of carts filling the air. 2 hours later, the doctor came out. The baby was born alive but would need to stay in an incubator due to prematurity. Claire was weak but stable. My mother let out a long breath and burst into tears. I exhaled too, feeling a weight lift. When Claire was moved to a regular room, I went in. She was pale, hair matted on the pillow. She looked surprised to see me. You came. I pulled up a chair. Where's the baby? I haven't seen him. She tilted her head toward the incubator. Through the glass, a tiny red infant lay curled under blue light, delicate limbs barely visible. I looked at him for a long time, my nephew, regardless of who his father was. Suddenly Claire said, Lena, sometimes I wonder, if Mom had shared her love between us, would we have turned out differently? I turned to her. Her eyes were tired and vulnerable, no sharpness left. I paused. Maybe. But we can't change the past. She closed her eyes, lashes wet. The day he was born, I was terrified. Terrified he'd grow up like me, measuring worth by houses, money, and others' approval. Terrified he'd be ashamed of me. I went to her bedside and took her hand. The fact that you're thinking that way shows you've changed. There's time. She didn't squeeze back, but she didn't pull away, just lay there, her breathing evening out as she fell asleep. I sat with her for nearly an hour until my mother came to relieve me. She looked at me, started to speak, then just said, Go on, I've got this. I nodded and left. I glanced back through the door. My mother was tucking the blanket around Claire, her movements clumsy yet gentle, so unlike her usual harshness. I realized this storm was slowly changing all of us. About 2 weeks after the funeral, my mother came to my studio, for the first time, of her own volition, to a place she'd always looked down on. She wore a plain padded coat, her hair grayer, her face more lined. She stood at the door, awkwardly looking around, then pulled a file folder from her bag. The bank sent another collection notice. I don't understand any of it. You said you'd handle your father's affairs. I took the folder, asked her to sit, and poured tea. She took a sip, then after a long silence said quietly, Lena, was I too hard on you? I looked at her, startled. She avoided my gaze. Claire was in the incubator, and I was home alone going through old photos. I saw pictures of you as a child. You actually had a nice smile. But back then I thought you weren't as articulate or charming as your sister, so. She didn't finish, but the crack in her armor was real. I set down my cup and said, Mom, I don't want to revisit the past. Let's focus on the present. I've talked to the bank. They'll allow installment payments with reduced interest. With your house as collateral and my cash flow, we can pay it off in 3 years. She was shocked. You'd help us? I nodded. Not for you or Claire, for Dad. I read his notebook. He wrote, I want to protect this family, even though I wasn't good at it. I don't want his legacy to be a debt unpaid. She was silent for a long time, tears dripping into her teacup. She wiped them, but more came. I didn't rush her. Finally she stood, came over, and hesitantly put her hand on my shoulder. Lena, I'm sorry. Those soft words turned a rusty lock in my heart. I didn't cry. I placed my hand over hers and said, it's okay. Let's just get it done. After that, she started to change. She stopped boasting about Claire, stopped criticizing me. At a church gathering, when someone brought up Marcus's legal troubles, she said, My daughter Lena spotted those problems long before anyone else. She's the professional. I heard about it and felt no joy, just a quiet sense that she was finally accepting reality. I helped her sort out her finances, refinanced the old house, applied for a payment extension, and advanced some money from my studio's reserves. She was nervous signing the documents, but she didn't back out. At the door, she turned and said, "Your father would be proud of you." I didn't reply, just nodded. That afternoon, I watched her walk away under the golden ginkgo trees, sunlight dappling through the branches, a late warmth I'd never expected. Spring came, and Marcus and Kevin Shaw's case went to trial. Kevin Shaw confessed first, revealing emails and chats where Marcus ordered him to forge acceptance reports and cut material costs. The prosecutor charged Marcus with major liability causing accidents and forging official documents. I received a subpoena as both whistleblower and technical expert. I called Claire to let her know. She was silent for a long time, then said, "Go ahead. I don't blame you. I always knew this day would come, I just never thought you'd be the one to open the door." I wanted to comfort her, but she hung up. On trial day, the gallery was packed, my mother, journalists. I stood in the witness box, facing the judge, the prosecutor, and Marcus in the defendant's chair. He looked thinner, his suit hanging loose, his eyes hollow. I laid out the evidence in sequence, the violations at Kevin Shaw's site, the structural flaws at Rosewood Lane, the crane accident at Jade Bay. I gave dates, photo IDs, and measurements, keeping my voice steady. The prosecutor asked, "Ms. Lena, why did you keep this evidence for 2 years?" I thought for a moment. Because I wasn't brave enough before. I was afraid of hurting my family, afraid of being isolated. But I learned that silence doesn't fix problems, it only endangers more people. The courtroom was quiet, I heard my own heartbeat. Marcus never looked up. In the gallery, Claire wasn't there, but my mother sat in the back row. I caught glimpses of her holding a handkerchief to her mouth, her eyes wet but silent. After the trial, as I walked out into the spring wind, my mother followed and said softly, "Let me buy you lunch." It was the first time she'd ever offered. We went to a small noodle shop and each had a bowl of hot broth, saying nothing about the trial, just finishing our meal together. My column's influence grew. I received letters from homeowners, young architects, retired inspectors. I organized useful leads for future investigations. The City Housing Authority hired me as a part-time consultant for their existing building safety inspection program, low pay, but a formal recognition of my expertise. Of course, the spotlight drew new threats. One night I got an anonymous email, "Back off, or the next thing that cracks won't be a house." I forwarded it to the police and upgraded my home security. I told my staff not to work late and to check all locks. Inside the industry, the association's proposed rule, members shall not use media to harm industry reputation, was clearly aimed at me. Drew advised me to prepare a countermove. I drafted a public initiative called Transparent Buildings, Honest Future, signed by a dozen like-minded professionals, calling for stricter oversight and public data platforms. It got both support and pushback. Mr. Wu's historic mansion took an unexpected turn. The city's Cultural Tourism Bureau designated it a model heritage renovation project, bringing subsidies and higher visibility. Mr. Wu was thrilled. "Lena, if this goes well, your name will go into the archives." I smiled, but in my head I was calculating, high profile means zero tolerance for mistakes. One weekend I visited my father's grave. A bouquet of withered flowers, probably my mother's, lay there. I removed it and placed fresh white chrysanthemums. I crouched until my legs went numb, then said aloud, "Dad, I read your notebook. I'm paying off the debt. Marcus's trial is coming. Mom and Claire will be okay. And my little house, it's solid. If you can see it from up there, don't worry." The wind rustled leaves around the headstone. I stood, brushed the dirt off my knees, and turned to leave. Cherry blossoms were just budding on the way down, they'd be in full bloom in a couple of weeks. I took a photo and sent it to Ju with the caption, "Spring's here. Let's hire 2 new people, we're busier than ever." She replied instantly, "On it, boss." Already drafting the job posting. I continued down the path at a steady pace. Ahead were Marcus's sentence, the debt repayment, Claire's children, the column's future, industry battles, my mother's last years, each like a building at a different stage, some just breaking ground, some topping out, some still empty lots. But I no longer rushed to see them finished. I only knew that every brick I laid was solid, every weld I checked. As for those who lived in them, whether they'd acknowledge the house's worth was up to them. I'd already moved into my own house, with strong doors and a warm fire. The road was long, the wind was cold, but the light had broken through.